thank you, Subhaji, for accepting this invitation. And today, as we are going to discuss about this, India's contribution to the mathematics, okay, the world mathematics. So we would like to start from the Aryabhatta actually, because I remember this song of Manoj Kumar film, like you know in that particular song he says देता ना दशमलव भारत तो चांद पे जाना मुश्किल था. So I remember that Dashamla and the Shunya. So these are the two things he talks about in that particular, song. So as a curiosity, normal Indian, I want to know, where, when exactly, maybe the era, which century this particular invention was done, as far as zero is concerned.
Thank you, Abhilasha, for having me on your show. The question of when was the fully developed decimal number system, when did it come about in India, has been studied in great detail by scholars for a long time. And this requires the common use of zero, and as is generally accepted by scholars everywhere, that did occur in India. And now whether it occurred in the 5th or the 4th or the 3rd century or probably even earlier is not certain. I personally believe that it probably happened about 2000 years ago. And because before that, the numbers that are represented in various inscriptions, etc., have a special sign for 10. And it's only after the development of zero that you have 10 represented as 1 and 0. Before that, there was a special sign which looked like a fish sign for the number 10. Of course, as far as language is concerned, the whole idea of zero and all of that has been a part of Indian culture for a very long time. Very ancient Vedic era textbooks also talk of very, very large numbers in multiples of 10. So I would imagine certainly a few centuries prior to Aryabhatta, that the use of the symbol of zero, which also indicates possibly the decimal point, and we do know that the operations of arithmetic were very systematically sketched out by Brahmagupta, and Brahmagupta lived about 100 years after Aryabhatta.
Okay. So you mentioned 2000 years ago, right? The
From our
invention
times,
of invention of zero decimal system. So one more thing, if it was called Shunya in India, and if it was invented in India only, why we are not calling it Shunya? Why we are calling it zero?
Oh, you call it zero in the English language, because the term shunya went westwards through Persia and the Arab lands. And, as words go, it's like chaturanga, the name for chess, went westwards, and chaturanga became shatranj. And then from Shah, it became chess. So words do change as they travel across cultures, because different languages have different sounds. For example, the English word Jesus in the Spanish word is called Jesus. J is her. So in Spain, they don't say Jesus, they say Jesus. It's only in the English word that you say Jesus. So words do change, and the shunyata. Okay, let me come back to the whole question of when is it that shunya as the symbol for zero was created. The reason why I think it was about 2000 years ago, maybe 50 AD or 50 CE. AD is also called CE these days, CE for Common Era. So a very powerful philosophy arose in India, which is called Shunyatavad. which is
Yeah.
a Buddhist philosophy, which says that everything comes out of shunyata, out of nothing. Now, it's often that philosophical ideas follow scientific ideas. So if shunyata as a philosophy became very powerful, and we know how to date it, because the name who's associated with the concept of shunyata in Buddhism is somebody called Nagarjuna. So we know that Nagarjuna lived about 2000 years ago from our current times, say, let's say about 50 CE, right? So if he was pushing Shunyatavad, so the concept of Shunyata or the symbol of zero must have arisen somewhat before him. And that's what allows us to be more certain that it was a few centuries before Aryabhatta.
Okay. So almost at the same time, right? Like Aryabhatta and Nagarjuna.
No, no. Aryabhatta was about 400,
400
400
CE.
about, yeah, 4 or 500 CE,
Okay.
476. He's supposed to have been born in 476. So that is about 500 years after Nagarjuna.
Okay. Okay.
Nagarjuna was 500 years prior to Aryabhatta.
Yeah. And Brahmagupta was 100 years after Aryabhatta.
Right, 629 is when one of his books is dated. And Brahmagupta gave the formulas for addition and subtraction of positive and negative numbers in the most systematic form. And he defined zero formally. Now, it's very interesting since we are talking of the decimal number system. This system went to Europe about 1100 through the translation of Indian books from Arabic into Latin by a mathematician, by a scholar, a European scholar named Fibonacci. So, so he translated all of this number system. But for 200 years in Europe, there was opposition to its adoption because the church was against it. The church said the negative numbers are numbers of the devil, so we should not accept it. But after about 200 years, eventually, because it's so much superior to not counting the way the Indian number system uses ones and zeros, that eventually it did conquer the entire world.
Yes, yeah, that's definitely true. So you just mentioned about this Fibonacci right now. So Fibonacci series is also very popular, and it has been used extensively in all the technical aspects of the today's modern world. And of course, this golden ratio is also involved. With the Fibonacci numbers like 1.618. So in the later, zero, it starts from the zero, right? Fibonacci series.
Well, Fibonacci series is the series where you add the previous two numbers and you get the
Yeah,
second one. So two,
additions.
three, and you get five. Five plus three is eight. Eight plus five is 13. So that is the sequence. Now, the Fibonacci series was defined exactly the same way. And in fact, he got it from Indian mathematics by Virahanka, which was a couple of hundred years ago, 100 years before Fibonacci, and it's sometimes also called the Virahanka series. But actually, it all goes back, according to some historians, to Pingal or Pingala, who's
Yeah,
about 200 BC. And he defined what is called Meru Prastar, a whole mountain of numbers where you start with one and then you get two and three, etc., five. And so, really, the background to Fibonacci series is very much older and probably goes as early as 200 BCE in
okay.
Pingala's Chanda Shastra. So that is much earlier, as we saw.
So Fibonacci series and binary numbers, they are the same or they are the different?
Oh, no. Binary numbers are representation of numbers in zeros and ones. If you look at computers, all the
Mm-hmm.
numbers are represented in the binary form because the data is sent as a signal or the absence of a signal, a pulse or an absence of a pulse. If there is a pulse, that is a 1. If there is an absence of a pulse, that is a 0. So the numbers are first, if let's say you have to write 5, you'll write it as 101. The very first one means 4. The second 0 means nothing, and the last one means 1. 4 plus 1 is 5. So that is very different. And the basics of binary number system also goes to Pingala. That is 200 BCE, and then it was reinvented or rediscovered, if you will, about 200-300 years ago in Europe. And finally, when the computer mathematics came along, and then it's become universal now. It's used wherever computers are to be used.
Yeah, so we were talking about these binary numbers. We were talking about this Fibonacci series. You have just mentioned about Sage Pingala as well, like his contribution with the Chanda Shastra. Chanda Shastra, definitely it is very famous and most of the people are aware about it, Chanda Shastra. But still, why we don't call this Fibonacci series or binary numbers like invented by says Pingla? It is still the somebody else name is associated with it, like the recent names.
Oh,
So
that's
what exactly the issue?
the issue is that Indians have to rewrite history of mathematics. Perhaps Indian scholars are a bit lazy. They find it easier just to reproduce European books, and NCERT has to revise its school textbooks where mathematics is discussed. All scholars, it doesn't really matter whether you're talking of Indian scholars or European scholars or Chinese scholars, accept that the origins of the binary number system is 200 BCE, 200 or 300 BCE in Chanda Shastra of Pingala. Everybody accepts that that Fibonacci series was done in India many centuries before Fibonacci. And of course, Fibonacci is a very popular name. And sometimes what happens is when a name has become popular, it's like for a long time, cities were called something like Aurangabad is now called Sambhaji Nagar, and people will take some time to get used to the new name. So
Yeah.
likewise, all this change would require more people using Virahanka, for example, for Fibonacci, because Virahanka gave that series exactly in the same form. And I personally, a few months ago, wrote a paper on Fibonacci series where I called it the Virahanka Fibonacci series. So VF series.
Okay.
So it all depends upon usage. It all depends upon people who write on it, mathematicians or user of mathematics in other disciplines. Once they start using a different name, then very soon it all changes. It's like, the city St. Petersburg in Russia. For 100 years during the Soviet time, it was called Leningrad, right? And then when Soviet Union collapsed, they went back to their old name, St. Petersburg, and now everybody calls it St. Petersburg, right? So it depends upon usage. It's really the problem with NCERT. And if NCERT were to change the usage to the correct one, then there won't be any problem. Then everybody will fall in with the new usage.
Okay, but only if Indian scholar, or they go ahead and they change all these things like rewrite everything. Will the world accept it?
Of
Do you
course,
think so?
because the scholars do accept it. This acceptance is a question of how you use names. A person can have more than one name. At home, you probably have a nickname. Outside, you have another name, right?
Yes.
So people or even places sometimes have more than one name. Like you look at Varanasi. In Varanasi, it's also called Kashi, right?
Yeah.
Or Banaras, it's also called Banaras. So
Yes.
likewise, it is possible that for some more time, people might keep on calling it Fibonacci, or if they follow my usage, they might call it Virahanka Fibonacci. And then some people might call it just the Virahanka series, and then that name will become popular. So it's
Yeah.
all a matter of usage by people, and nothing is permanent. These names or the conventions or usages can change with time, and so in the future we may find these numbers or these theories or the conventions used differently.
Okay. That means like we can recognize like, two or three people at a time with the one invention, right? We can give
We
that.
can sometimes add two names because the name Fibonacci has been used for a long time. So you can say, all right, because it's been used for a long time, we can also keep that name for it, but
Yes.
call it Virahanka Fibonacci, because Virahanka, according to all histories of mathematics, was 300 years prior to him, and therefore we can call it VF series, right? And likewise, there are many other series, like now there is something called Madhav series. It's an infinite series, which was
Okay.
done, which occurred 300 years before European mathematicians did it. So now people also call it Madhav series. There's a Gregory series. So now they call it Madhav Gregory series or just Madhav series. It's just a matter of convention. It's a matter of usage. If Indian mathematicians start using the correct terminology, and then if Indian school textbooks started using the correct terminology, very soon it'll become popular.
Yeah. So I'm saying like, do you see the changes happening in this context? Like, these Indian scholars, whether they are coming forwards and, they are rewriting it, or, they are putting forward what was there in the history
The
confidently.
Indian historians of mathematics are totally aware, and in journals, which are peer-reviewed journals, all the correct names are there. But it's a challenge for, let's say, computer scientists. The name Fibonacci series comes very often in computer science, right? So if computer
Yes.
scientists were to be aware, then they will use it. So, and how do people become aware? First of all, they come across these numbers in their school books, school textbooks. If the
Yes.
real problem is NCERT books, they should use the correct names, or they could even be generous and say, as we mentioned, they should say, okay, let's use Virahanka Fibonacci. We are not going to throw out Fibonacci, so that people also know that. But they have to take the first step, and then people who go through mathematics education in India and they go out and do their PhD, they would still know what the correct name is, and then they'll be less hesitant to use the correct name. Because right now, you read a paper and the paper uses Fibonacci, you can still, in your own paper, use Virahanka as well. So it all is a question of what people feel comfortable doing. And if
Yes.
the Virahanka name is also there, then they'll become more comfortable doing it. Not every computer scientist goes to history of mathematics journal articles. So since they don't know that it is okay to use Virahanka, they are hesitant. You see that? So
Yes.
it's a sociology question. The history, there are two aspects to history. One is history as accepted by historians. The other is the sociology of the use of different terms. And that is a different kind of a question.
Yeah, I think even when I was in school, I didn't learn anything about it. And when right now only, like, few days back only, I came to know about, few of the mathematicians, including Virahanka. I never heard of him. Of course, I heard of Ramanujan, I heard of Bhaskaracharya, I heard of Aryabhatta, Brahmagupta, but this man, I never heard of it. So when I read, of course through the Google only, but I read about it, and then I came to know, oh, the somebody who like him was existing. So I think that is very much required. Like when we are actually having this books, textbook, mathematics books, some brief is required, like how it was developed and what is exactly the history, and then you go ahead, like whatever the formula and the the techniques you are going to resolve those particular problems, mathematical problems or arithmetic problems, or whether it is related to geometry. So that will be there. I think it will be very interesting, and the children will be very happy to learn about it.
Right. Now, of course, in mathematics books or in geometry books, the very first result that all children read about is the Pythagoras theorem, right? It's also called the theorem of the diagonal of the square, right? A squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. Now, Pythagoras lived, I think, 400 or 500 BCE, but several centuries before him, maybe 800 or 900 BCE, in the Baudhyan Shulba Sutra in Sanskrit,
Yes.
you have this theorem. So some people also call it the Baudhyan theorem. Now, and it's generally known, all historians of mathematics know about Baudhyan, that he did the uh, theorem, Pythagoras theorem, or the theorem of the diagonal of the square, several centuries prior. Now, I don't know whether NCERT books use or speak about Baudhyan or not. And they should. If they don't, it is our own problem. It's our own fault. If Westerners accept Baudhyan, everybody accepts Baudhyan, why aren't we told? Aren't we, meaning our children, being told that the birth of geometry really, in a scientific sense, occurred in India? And the Shulba Sutras are about measurements or related to creating temples or altars and so on. You take a
Yes.
rope and make those measurements, and that's what Shulba is all about. The sutras on the Shulbas. And that story is also interesting. That story can also motivate a child to find out why, or to know why geometry is important in constructions. You want to build, you want to create a structure on the ground which is square. You're making a Vedi, right? An altar, a fire altar. That's where it all came from. So I think in the NCERT books, they need to bring in that background to make it also more interesting for children, and then tell them that, look, this is how it came. And that is what the most important theorem in geometry is. It occurred in India many, many centuries before Greece.
Yes, it is required. I don't know about the textbooks right now because I haven't gone through, so I cannot comment on it. You are talking about the structure right now, so I just want to go back to that Fibonacci series and the golden ratio. We were mentioning about it. So this golden ratio, that has been found in Indian temples as well, like when they were constructed, and then this golden ratio we can find in all the natural items, like maybe like flowers, and then galaxies. So that particular ratio is there, and it was like I think it was revelation to the Indian people at that time, maybe Indian sages, more accurately I can say that. So it was known to them. So how it is possible?
Oh,
And
it is possible because it is the solution to a very simple equation, and an arithmetic equation. And it is also derivable from Pingala's Meru Prastar. So it was a part of what was happening in Indian mathematics. And so there's nothing very advanced and complicated about this ratio. And as we know, this ratio is very pleasing aesthetically. And the mathematics of that was already a part of the Indian
yes.
area. So very easy to find out why it was done. We have Pingala's Chanda Shastra. from where it's obtained. In fact, I've written an essay also on the golden ratio and its old history, and you can Google it, or your darshaks, your viewers can Google it and they'll find it.
Sure, sure. I'll give that link in the description
Okay.
so they can just click and read it out in detail about it. So, one more thing, like why it is called golden ratio then? Why it is called golden?
I don't know the history. Golden, maybe golden in the sense of it's a beautiful ratio,
Yeah, maybe associated with the
something
nature.
very beautiful or perfect. It's a perfect ratio because it's perfect from the perspective of how pleasing it is. And oh, I should also tell you, as far as golden ratio is concerned, it also emerges from musicology, from music, theory of
Oh,
music. And the earliest scientific framework or theoretical framework of music is in Bharata Muni's Natya Shastra. And as you know, in the saptak, which is called the octave in English, right? You go from one
mhm.
register to another one in music. You have the seven notes, right? Sari, Gama, Padha, Nisa, right?
Yes.
So now all this, and there the frequency doubles as you go from one to the next. There are 22 shrutis in the seven notes, there are 22 shrutis. And there's a lot of mathematics connecting the placement of these notes with respect to the shrutis, because the shrutis are not uniformly distributed. So there was a lot of mathematics in music, and music has always been central to the Indian tradition. In fact, you have the four Vedas, and Samaveda is the Veda of music. The Rig Veda was compared to the earth, the Yajur Veda was compared to the atmosphere, and Samaveda was compared to the heavens, because that brings you closest to the deepest thing. It's on earth, you're doing Rig Veda, there are rules and so on. But with music, you merge with the music itself. So music has always played a very central role. And that is another reason, and golden ratio shows up there as well. And that's another reason why all these numbers were very important
Okay,
in
that's
India.
interesting. I didn't know about it. About music, I didn't know. I always thought of like, the natural things and the temple cities existing. But yeah, this is something new for me as well. Like golden ratio is available over there. So let's come to like, we are talking about this golden ratio. I also want to go about this, Indians knew about the distance between Earth and Sun, Moon and Sun, like, Earth and Sun distance is like, 108 times the diameter of the Sun. Then Moon and Earth, like 108 times the diameter of the Moon. So how, these kind of inventions were taken place at that time without any, I'll say, advanced technology at that time, advanced instruments. So how could they come to this conclusion that this is
Well,
the same and it is
yeah,
exactly the same?
the the distance of, let's say, the sun from the earth is 108 times the sun's diameter from the earth, right? But it's
Yeah.
very easy to calculate it. I'll tell you how. Let's say there is a rishi or acharya sitting under a tree, and he tells his disciple, take a long pole of a certain height, and he says, now
Okay.
you go backwards so many heights of the pole, right? The
Okay.
pole is, let's say, uh, uh, 6 feet. Then you go back 6 feet and then go back another 6 feet. If you go back 108 times the height of the pole, the size of the pole would look like exactly the same as the size of the setting sun or the rising sun. So
Oh.
that would tell you that the sun is 108 times its diameter from the earth. So very easy.
Oh.
You just use logic. Do you see
Oh.
that? So you don't need advanced mathematics or tools to find that the sun or the moon, because they're relative size is about the same from the Earth, that they are 108 times their respective diameter. Now, with regard to how far they are from the Earth, because they could be almost the same distance because they look about the same size, then you have to look at the duration of the solar eclipse and the lunar eclipse, right? And since the durations are different, then you will know that the sun is much further off based on what their distances are. The moon takes, since the moon is closer, it takes
Yes.
a certain distance to go across, right? The shadow that forms in the eclipse. So all of those things, because it's the shadow of the Earth falling on the moon, that is the lunar eclipse, right? And while the solar eclipse is where the moon comes in between the sun and the Earth. So looking at their durations, you can find out which one is further off and what is their relative separation. So this is how people use logic, these mathematicians or the sages or the rishis, and they arrived at their judgments. And they were, of course, looking at the skies all the time. The earliest Indian text on astronomy is called Jyotish Vedanga, and it's about 1300 BCE. And it talks about the motions of the sun and the moon primarily. And they were obviously aware that how many cycles of the sun take place in a certain number of years, and how many cycles of the moon, and that tells you a lot about the lunar year. The lunar year is only 354 tithis, right? 354 days. And the solar year is 365 days. The lunar year is only 354 days. Did you know that? So these 354 days were made into 360 tithis. So that tells you the idea of tithi. Because in Indian astronomy, you don't use the day, you use the tithi.
Yes.
And the solar year is 371 point some tithis, while the lunar year, what was done by the Jyotishis was to count the movement of the moon, and the months were also corresponding to that. And then because there is a discrepancy, there's a difference of 11 days, right, between the solar
Yes.
year and the lunar year. So in 3 years, you have to add an extra month, or 2.5 years, and that is called Adhik Mas. So an additional month was added, and that created the entire structure of Bharatiya Jyotish, right? Indian astronomy.
That's
So
why we have Adhik Mas in
that's why
some years.
you have Adhik Mas in certain years. And what the ancient people did, perhaps all over the world, right now we have electricity, etc. Those days, the sun set, and then it was all dark. When it was all dark, you could see the stars and you could see the motion of the moon. And so humans at that time wondered about, hey, where are we? Where are the grahas? You have these 5 grahas moving in the sky, because these were bright spots which were moving across the background of the stars. So this is what the sages, the rishis, thought about and looked about, and speculated on, and they counted. And the various festivals that we had were tied to the moon, the motions of the moon and the sun and the various grahas, right? Because the period of Budh or Mercury is 87 days. The period of Shukra or Venus is 225 days, and so on. The period of Mars is longer. So they knew that how from there they could estimate how the various grahas were moving. The period of Jupiter, Brihaspati, is almost 12 years, and of Shani or Saturn is almost 30 years. So they move much more slowly across the background of stars than Budh. Budh is Mercury, right? or Shukra, which is so a lot of the mythology that we have, the stories of in the Puranas are also the story of the motions of these planets and the whole system, because the seasons also change. Every 1,000 years, the season shifts by one nakshatra. There are 27 nakshatras. The
Yeah.
period of the precession of the earth is about 26,000 years. So 1 year, there is a shift of one nakshatra, there is a shift in 1,000 years. So the ancient books that we have, they have they have descriptions of the various nakshatras. And if the earlier books start with one nakshatra, the later books start with another nakshatra, which tells you that the later book, if it's a shift of only one nakshatra, is 1,000 years after the first book, right? You look at, for
Oh,
example,
like that.
yeah, and that, so there are lots of clues in the books which help you provide a dating of the books. So if Vedanga Jyotish was about 1300 BCE, because there is also some information about a certain eclipse that took place. Now, if you go back, if you look at Shatapat Brahman, that's much earlier. If you look at the Vedic Samhitas, they are much earlier. So from those accounts or from the stories of, for example, Shiva cutting off the head of Prajapati, right? That is the shifting of the year from Orion to another star. So that was written up in a
Oh,
story that Shiva, as the axis of the universe, outer universe or axis of our consciousness, uh, cut off the head of Prajapati, because the Prajapati was not the beginning of the year anymore. Now people look at these stories as literal truth, but they have very interesting astronomy mapped into them. And then you write you only know, because you're in our schools and colleges, we are not being given a deeper understanding of all of these stories. So people think that these are stories, and then some people will, as in the movie Kerala Story, which I haven't seen, but some people are telling, hey, why is Shiva so upset that his wife has been killed? These are astronomical stories. You have not been told those stories, so you say, hey, what's wrong with my belief system? You see that? We are hurting our own understanding by not telling them what it is. Now, there is no confusion about it. All scholars know what these stories mean. The only people who don't know are Indian young people, because our education system has kept this knowledge away from them, because we are still using the European lens to teach Indians about what India is.
yes, that's true. That's definitely true that we are using it. Like, I think that has become that has come into the genetics of Indian people post British era, that until and unless you don't get that recognition or validation from the Western people or the European people, you don't feel like you're right. So it happens as far as yoga is concerned. It has happened like that only. When Americans and Europeans, they started practicing, and they they are saying like yoga is something very great, and they have like too many things to say about yoga now. And now Indian people are understanding like we should also uh, practice yoga. We should learn more about yoga. So that has happened, like something is ours, but still, like until and unless there is a recognition from outside, you are not serious about discussing it, or learning more about it. So that is completely
Absolutely.
true.
Yeah. You travel anywhere in the world, even in the smallest towns, let's say in Peru, you'll find yoga studios. People are doing yoga everywhere. But
Yes.
what the West has done is to market it very effectively. We in India still have to learn how to market it in the right way. And by market, for example, if you look at martial arts from Japan or Korea, they still control how it's done. Indians have lost the control of yoga, the asanas to the West, because the Westerners are marketing it much more effectively, right? And now Indians would probably want to get connected to, because they also have modules where you can get certification, and so you join up with one or the other. While in India, it's done in a more or less in a haphazard manner. So I think it's also now what often happens in India is that people complain, why doesn't the government do it? And that's a big mistake. The government is not equipped to handle these things because the government is often a bureaucracy for the sake of the bureaucracy itself, for their own careers and so on. They're not invested in any of this stuff. The private sector has to step in. There has to be academies within India, for example, for history of mathematics. And they have to then put pressure on NCERT because the government babus, they don't know about the history of mathematics. They're not supposed to. They're passed some exams and they've become officers in one organization or the other. So we need within India many such independent organizations in yoga, in tantra, and many other things who make sure that information that's being disseminated to the larger public is accurate. Otherwise, and if it doesn't, then people with vested interest would put wrong information on the internet, right? And on social media. So there's got to
It is
be,
already there.
you have to counter it. And to counter it, you need private organizations with reputation. If they do it properly, if they have associations with good people, then people would trust them.
We have some idea. I think some of the schools are there, like Bihar School of Yoga is there, then Yoga Institute is there. Then we have K. Pattabijois, from this institute. Then Iyengar Institute. So there are handful of them, but the names are the same. Like I think maybe like 50 years earlier as well, we were taking their names, and now also we are taking their names. There is no more addition to those names. So that has been there.
Right. And so what has happened recently is that there are some people in the West who are claiming that all these asanas were copied from gymnastics, etc., etc. But that's totally false because we have these texts, 1,000-year-old texts, who talk about many of these asanas. And
Oh,
yeah, there are these asanas are actually mentioned, the names are mentioned in Sanskrit
yes,
texts.
yes, it is there. But like, this thing new for me, like, gymnastic, they are saying, like, this is copied from gymnastic. I think that is totally wrong.
That's totally wrong, but it's all a question of who controls the megaphone. If there are the Westerners want to show that, well, they are going to tell you what the Indian story is. So Indians also have to come up. We are not saying that Westerners are not good. There are lots of wonderful scholars there, but there are also scholars or people who are not probably well informed, whose knowledge is half-baked, and then they come along and they write in one newspaper or the other in the West because the reputation of these newspapers or magazines is much higher than Indians latch onto it. Then they say, well, this is what the story is. So we need, and in the social age of social media, and not only that, India is already the world's third largest economy. India is a very powerful country now. So if you are powerful, you need more Atma-Vishwas, you need more confidence, and you need to put out the information with more confidence. And you have to do it properly. You don't have to make up things. We self-confidence or Atma Vishwas comes up if you're connected to truth, whatever the truth is. If we keep on speaking what the truth is, people will trust us. So
Yeah.
all that is required, and I think that change is taking place. And now we
Yes,
have more
that is
groups also.
happening. Yeah, that is happening. It is little slow than expected, but I think the speed will pick up in a few days or few years in the time to come, and the things will change in a better way.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right.
So just coming back to our, the original conversation regarding mathematics, I want to understand about Ramanujan, Srinivas Ramanujan. So he had just lived for 32 years, and still, his contribution is very big as far as mathematics is concerned. So just, would like to know, like, what has been his contribution for our understanding.
Uh, Srinivas Ramanujan made very important contributions to number theory. And as we know, he learned or he created a lot of the mathematics himself because he didn't have access to Western books at that time. And I think he had only one book of formulas, which he had as he was growing up. And then he created a lot of mathematics himself. And as you said, he died very young. He was only 32 years old, and I think he passed. He failed his matriculation examination or something because he didn't know English very well or whatever. And then he
Yes.
sent his formulas to many scholars, and most of them ignored it. But there was this guy G.H. Hardy at Cambridge who was so astonished at the subtlety of these formulas. So he invited him. So he went to Cambridge. He was there for a few years. Then he felt very sick, came back, and he died. And what's fascinating is that people would ask him when he was alive, how do you get these formulas? Because they were so different from the mathematics that everybody else was doing. And he would say, well, the goddess Namagiri, which was his family deity, comes to me in my sleep or in my dream and tells me these formulas. So when I wake up, I write them down. And after he died, his notebooks, when he was dying, he was still scribbling mathematics. And when he was dead, these notebooks were lost for about 50 years, and they were discovered in the 1970s. And they were created quite a stir in math circles because they've discovered much more math they didn't even know that he had done. And mathematicians are still working on those notebooks and amazing math. Now, an interesting thing about it is that how do you interpret his claim that the goddess Namagiri would give him all the math because he couldn't explain the background? And the answer to that is that in India, and this is something to do with yoga as well, the Indian view of reality is that we have our body, but beyond the body, you have the Atma, right? In the Western view, there is no such Atma. They speak about the soul, etc., but the soul is not the same thing as Atma because there's only one Atma. There are many souls. The souls are like bodies, right? Everybody has their own soul. And when they are dead, on the day of judgment, they go to heaven, etc., and they are remade in the body. That's not what the Indian view is. The Indian view is that the Atma contains all the knowledge there is. The Atma is beyond space and time. And you, if you can get connected to the Atma, and in fact, asanas or yoga, hatha yoga, etc., that's only preparation for samadhi, for one to know the Atma within them, right? And so if you know the Atma within you, and you can do it through various sadhanas, through various practices, and those practices also imply the worship of the goddess because the goddess is nature and we ourselves are nature, right? So that's why goddess is so important. And if you look at consciousness, that is Shiva. If you look at reality for all it is, that is Vishnu. It all comes together. You know, Vishnu and Shiva are two aspects to reality. One is reality as such, Sat. Uh, Shiva is Chit, and the goddess is Ananda, right? Which gives us this knowledge. So all of reality is also viewed as Satchidananda, right? And so what Ramanujan was able to do was to connect to the reality, that Chit within, which is Shiva or the goddess. Shiva through the goddess, because Shiva is also called Prakash or light. And the goddess is Vimarsha, where the light falls. So the goddess is who makes this knowledge accessible to you. And so and it all hangs together. And in fact, that's all creativity in all people, no matter which part of the world, occurs spontaneously through the grace of the goddess. That's the phrase that is used, right? It all hangs together. That's where you go to mathematics through yoga.
Yeah. So, can we call, like, Atman, you are saying? So, universal consciousness and Atman can be the same?
They are the same. That is the whole
Yeah, right?
idea. Universal consciousness and Atman are the same. And the Atman is also called Shiva, or you could call it
Yes.
Purushottam in the Bhagavad Gita. You can say
Yeah.
Krishna, right?
Purusha Prakriti. Yeah.
Precisely. So they are the same. So all human beings or all pranis have the same Atman, right?
Yes.
But their mind system is separate, and it's separate between two different people. It's separate because there are three sharirs. There is the Karan sharir, there is the Sukshma sharir, and then there is the Sthul sharir. The physical body is the Sthul sharir. The Sukshma sharir is the mind, and one part of the mind is the Karan sharir, which is the kind of temperament that you're born with, or the kind that is a kind of a filter between this Atman and your mind. So this light falls on the mind, and all of yoga ultimately is to clear that filter, because you have some skaras that you have done or that have been put into your head when you're growing up, which make a filter in the Karan Sharir, right? So how
Yes.
to, and all the asanas and all the dhyan and everything else that you do is to clear that filter so that the light falls on the mind in all its clarity. And when it falls in all this clarity, that's when, as Vibhuti Pad of Yoga Sutra, Patanjali tells you, that you get all those siddhis, you get an understanding that you were not aware of. In the Sukshma Sharir, you have the Manomaya Kosha, the mind, the ordinary mind, and on top of that is the intellect, which is the Vijnanamaya Kosha, right? Which
Vijnanamaya
is the
Kosha.
intellect, which is the intellect. But above that is the Anandamaya Kosha, which is where your Karan Sharir is, which is what either covers the light of consciousness or opens it up. And if it opens it up, you have access to mathematics. Because what is mathematics? Mathematics is logic. The more you push logic, you get mathematics. And so then your mind gets access to all this capacity to reason in a way which brings it closer to the understanding of this Atman, which is
Yes.
our true reality,
Yes, definitely. So, like yoga and mathematics together here, like understanding um, more about yourself, understanding more about mathematics. Like,
Right.
so I want to understand, like, what is exactly there, like, maybe Indian genes or, like, Indian people, like, that's why our contribution is, so much, at advanced level as far as, mathematics is concerned, or other areas also concerned. So what is the thing, or what are the areas because of that we have this, live, I'll say privilege as well, or we can say, like, this can be the gift for the Indian people as well. So what is that?
Well, you have to remember, first of all, that India is the oldest continuous cultural and civilizational tradition, right? India's past,
Yes.
the Vedas, although some Western scholars look at the Rig Veda maybe 2000 to 1500 BCE, but in reality, it's much older. Maybe it's the third millennium, but whatever, let's say even 2000 BC. So it's a very long period of time. There's been a long tradition, and people have looked at reality. What are the Vedas all about? The Veda is Atma Vidya. It's about consciousness. So the Indian sages have looked at the deepest questions of existence and meaning from as early on as possible. and they use logic and reasoning, and that's why they are calm. People have generally been calm. They've not been, driven by passion and go out and kill non-believers, etc. That's not part of the Indian story, right? In India, they
Yes.
say you can use whatever sadhana, and based on where you stand, your beliefs might be different, but slowly as you go up, then you will really know what the reality is. And so India has created some of the world's greatest architecture, right? You look at the great temples, and the Kailash temple of Ellora, for example, where a whole mountain was excavated, and a whole temple with all the murtis are from a single rock. There's nothing like that on earth. The greatest artistic creation, in my view, and we don't even celebrate it as widely as we should be doing it, right? And that certainly happened in your state of Maharashtra. Now, we have this great tradition, and also India was the richest land in the world. Until 1,000 years ago, India's share of the world economy was almost 50%. People don't know that. And when the English came, 1800, it was still about 20%, 20 to 25%. By the time the English left, in 1918, it had dropped to as low as 1.8%. The English century, the 19th century, was horrific for India because the Industrial Revolution took place in Europe, and they put tariffs on Indian products, and they used India to sell their products. So India really became extremely poor in the 19th century, extremely poor. And that's when, a lot of social disruption also occurred. When people didn't have anything to eat, they turned on each other, the various jatis and so on. That was not the case. If you look at Megasthenes' book on India, he says that, look, in India, everybody considers everybody else to be equal, because people had thought about these things. Every human being has the same Atman. That is the foundation of yoga. That's the foundation of Veda, right?
Yes.
So now India is again going up, and India's share of the world economy in PPP terms is about 8 to 9% now. If it doubles once again, so Indians will once again, with their wisdom, with this tradition of yoga and Veda. Yoga is Veda lived Veda, right? Is yoga. Will be well equipped. Every human being is the same, but you have to believe in yourself. If the Indian tradition gives you the techniques to believe in yourself, and if this knowledge, the yogic knowledge, goes to other parts of the world as well, as it is going, it will also help them find whatever is possible in themselves. So the whole world will become prosperous and wonderful. That's what I think is going to happen.
Yeah. So we can create that magic again
Yes, not only in India, but also spread it to all corners of
to
the
the
world,
world.
because all people are the same. Every human being is the same. Every human being should get an opportunity to discover this infinite potential that is within them. And mathematics is
That's
just one part of that potential.
that's true. That's true. I just want to, conclude with one more question, because when I was, searching, or, I was going through the whole history of Indian mathematics, I came across these two manuscripts. Of course, I know about Brahmi manuscript. It was available at the time of Samrat Ashoka as well, because his, writings are in Brahmi. So there is one more mention of this, I think, Bakshila. One more script is there. Uh, just Bakshali, sorry, Bakshali manuscript.
Okay,
Yeah.
right. Uh, Brahmi is only a script. Bhakshali is a manuscript. There were
Okay.
many scripts in India. The oldest script in India is the so-called Indus or Indus Saraswati script, which goes back to 2600 BCE. That is almost 4,600 years ago, and the
4,600
100
years.
years ago. And then, and for a long time, for 1,000 years, everything, all the inscriptions use the so-called Indus script. And then the inscriptions that we have during the Mauryas, etc., are in the Brahmi script. And all Indian scripts that we have now, for example, Malayalam or Tamil or Bengali or Assamese or Telugu, they're all, or Uriya, they're all derived from the Brahmi script. And not just the Indian scripts. If you go to Southeast Asia, you go to Java, or you go to Burma, you go to Thailand, they're also from Brahmi script. Brahmi script is the grandmother of all the Indian scripts. And also the scripts of Central Asia were derived from the Brahmi script. So I myself done research for many years and argued on scientific grounds that Brahmi script is derived from the Indus script. And because their shapes look almost the same and their frequencies of different characters, the more important of those shapes are about the same. So now Bhaskali manuscript is a manuscript which some people have dated to 3rd century, but more historians date it to 7th or 8th century, which is in a later script. It's not, I don't think it's in Brahmi script. I think it's probably in Sharda script or a later script. So that gives the earliest, or one of the earliest recorded mathematics from India, and on a birch bark manuscript. But you also have inscriptions with mathematical illusions. And of course, we talked about the various siddhantas like Brahmaguptas or Aryabhattas, etc., which have been in the manuscript form and copied, etc. And there are references to them in other books so that we know that their contents have not changed. But, in the ancient times, as now, every few decades, a manuscript would be copied, or when it was shared, it would be copied. And then it will be copied again. So you may not necessarily get the earliest versions of the manuscript, but Bhaskali is one of them because it got buried. So the pages of the manuscript have been radiocarbon dated, and some pages are as early as the 3rd century CE, and there are some which are later. So there's some confusion. There's a dispute whether it's really 7th century or could it be earlier as well.
Still, we are not able to come to the conclusion, like what is the
There's
era
no
when it
agreement.
was done.
Yeah, there's no agreement, but it's only important from the perspective of um, early record on paper or on some on where the document, on a document, earliest record. But from the understanding of Indian mathematics, it's not important because we know that that the siddhantas that we have, like Brahma's Sput Siddhanta or Brahmagupta or Aryabhatta's Aryabhati, etc., we know how to date them because their date is given them. We know the date of those people, of those mathematicians. And we have the earlier texts as well. As I mentioned, I spoke about Vedanga Jyotish, which is 1300 BCE, or you have Surya Siddhanta, or then you have various Buddhist texts which speak about some mathematics also in passing. And certainly we have Pingala's Chanda Shastra, or we have Bharat Muni's Natya Shastra, which is also about 200 or 300 BCE. And there is combinatorics there, combinatorics, combinations, permutations, etc. They've been a part of Indian mathematics as well. So there are so many names, continuous. And as we know, there were these universities in India, but they were ultimately all destroyed when the Turks came in, and the last was destroyed, when Nalanda was burned for 6 months by Khilji. But then mathematics still kept on getting created in families, like the Kerala School of Mathematics that I mentioned. So this was a family network. So Indian mathematics is a great, wonderful story. and there is
Yes.
general agreement amongst historians about what its significance is. The only thing that lacking is that all aspects of it are not reflected in the school curriculum that we have in India, and I'm hoping that that will be changed in the coming years.
Yeah, I think it will change because the people like you are talking about it. There are more people who are talking about it, writing about it, and of course, uh, just because of these talks now, because of social media, because of internet, now there is no limitation. You can reach to thousands people, lakhs people, crores of people at the same time. So I think things are changing actually, because if I know something, there will be some more people who knows about it. So more and more people understand it, and of course things will change, and we'll have again maybe the one more golden era of Indian mathematics.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Abhilasha. I really enjoyed being on your program. I'm glad we had an interesting conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abhilasha ji, and my blessings to you. The very best to you.
Thank you. Thank you.